The F4F Wildcat, initially planned as a biplane and almost cancelled, still later became the main Navy fighter when the US entered the war. It held its own against the more nimble Japanese planes in the first years of the war, and even stayed in use on escort carriers after its successor, the F6F, arrived. Though it was not as advanced or as successful as the F6F Hellcat or the F4U Corsair, it was a sturdy and dependable plane. So let's see the history of the Grumman F4 Wildcat planes. In the 1930s, Grumman developed several planes for the US Navy. The first one in their Navy fighter line was the FF, or Fifi, developed in 1933. It was a conventional biplane design, but featured a retractable landing gear. Actually, it was the first ever carrier-based aircraft featuring a retractable undercarriage. The wheels retracted into the fuselage but stayed visible. This was a signature Grumman design for the following years. Though later this landing gear design received a lot of criticism, as it caused many accidents when it didn't lock in place properly, and also for the clumsy manual operation. In 1935, this plane was followed by the F2F design, which was an upgrade over the FF with better maneuverability and higher top speed. Shortly after, in 1936, it was followed by the F3F, another upgrade after the Navy found some stability issues with the F2F. The Grumman F3F was delivered to the Navy between 1937 and 1938, and it was the last biplane used by US forces. The F4F Wildcat development was not as straightforward as its predecessors. Though it was introduced in 1940, the work on it actually started in 1936. It was originally just meant to be the next upgrade in the FF line, and it was still designed as a biplane. While it was still in the design phase, the Navy started testing the Brewster F2A Buffalo, and already ordered that in production in 1936. Just in case the Brewster plane fails to live up to the expectations, the Navy placed an order for Grumman's new plane as well. The official designation for this new design was XF4F1. But for Grumman, it was clear now the new monoplanes are outperforming the biplanes in every aspect, and the age of the biplanes has ended. So they abandoned the original idea and redesigned the plane as a monoplane, under the name XF4F2. It kept the overall shape of the fuselage and the signature retractable landing gear, but it was a more modern mid-wing monoplane. It also featured a more powerful 1050 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine. The plane's armament consisted of two nose-mounted 30 caliber machine guns and option to mount two 50 caliber machine guns in the wings. The F4F design still retained the original hand-crank landing gear that was carried over since the first FF biplane, though it was very outdated by that time. It required 30 turns on a hand crank to lower or raise the landing gears, which was a tedious task while flying a plane. The XF4F2 made its maiden flight in September 1937, and not long after, in April 1938, it participated in evaluation tests against the XF2A Buffalo and the Seversky P-35. From the three planes, the Grumman design reached the highest top speed at 290 miles an hour, followed by the Buffalo and finally the Seversky design. Though the XF4F2 got closest to the 300 miles an hour desired speed set by the Navy, they found the Buffalo an overall better design. It handled better, it had a hydraulic landing gear opposed to the manual one on the Grumman plane, and its Cyclone engine was less complicated. The Brewster company was awarded the contract, but the XF4F showed promise, so it wasn't discarded completely. Grumman started working on a new prototype, the XF4F3, which was actually a big redesign, leaving only the fuselage and the landing gear intact. The new prototype received new wings which were longer by 4 feet with squared-off tips, resulting in a bigger wing area. The tail section was redesigned as well, and the plane featured a new R1830 engine with a 2-stage supercharger producing 1200 horsepower. Finally, with these changes, the aircraft showed its true potential. The new prototype's first flight took place in February 1939, and it reached 333 miles an hour top speed, achieved 33,000 feet service ceiling, and demonstrated a 3,000 feet per minute climb rate. Since the deliveries on the Brewster Buffaloes were very slow, the Navy decided to give a contract to Grumman as well for the new plane in August 1939. So let's take a look at the technical specifications of the production variant, the F4F3. The plane featured a Pratt & Whitney R1830 radial air-cooled engine producing 1,200 horsepower. It could reach a maximum speed of 331 miles an hour, a cruise speed of 154 miles an hour, had a range of 845 miles and a service ceiling of 39,500 feet. The armament on the production variant consisted of 4 50 caliber machine guns on the wings, and it could carry 2 100-pound bombs or 6 rockets. The XF4F1 was the first version of the plane still designed as a biplane, which was quickly dropped and followed by the XF4F2 version, the early redesign to a monoplane, to compete with the Brewster Buffalo. This variant was still not competitive enough, but showed enough potential to the Navy to encourage further development. So the XF4F3 variant was developed with new wings, tail and stronger engines, and then this became the production variant as F4F3. The production variants had a longer fuselage, and they eliminated the 30 caliber machine guns in the nose and featured 4 50 caliber machine guns in the wings instead. During production, the shortage of two-stage superchargers led to the development of the F4F3A version, which featured a much simpler single-stage 2-speed supercharger. These variants were used side by side with the normal F4F3s, but had worse performance, so they were not very popular amongst the pilots. The F4F3S Wildcat Fish was an experimental floatplane conversion developed in 1942 with the plan to be used in bases in the Pacific before the airfield constructions. Its first flight took place in February 1943, but the added drag reduced the plane's performance significantly, and as it turned out, the airfield constructions went faster than expected, so it didn't went into production. The F4F4 version entered service in 1941, featuring additional 2 machine guns in the wings, raising the total to 6, and the first to feature the stow-wing folding system patented by Grumman. These new models replaced the earlier ones gradually, but some of its features were unpopular with the pilots. The folding wings and extra guns added weight, and the ammunition amount stayed the same as on earlier versions, but it was spread between 6 guns, not 4, resulting in decreased firing time. When Grumman ceased the F4F production in 1943 and switched to the F6F Hellcat, General Motors continued to produce the F4Fs under the name FM1 and later FM2. The FM1 was identical to the F4F4 version, except it featured only 4 machine guns but added bomb racks. The later FM2 version featured a stronger 1,350 horsepower engine. During their service, the Wildcats were mostly outperformed by the more agile Japanese fighters, but they managed to hold their own thanks to their heavier armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and more robust construction. The Wildcats could take hundreds of rounds from the Japanese 7.7mm machine guns and still stay in the air. Many US pilots who lost their planes survived, while the lighter Japanese fighters burst into a ball of fire very easily when shot. The Navy even tested flotation devices on the Wildcats, but these were later abandoned as they didn't want the enemy to capture the planes. If ditched, they usually stayed afloat long enough for the pilot to get out and get the life raft ready, even without these devices. After developing new tactics utilizing the plane strengths, the Wildcats managed to put up a good fight against the Japanese planes, especially if they managed to get the altitude advantage thanks to the radar and early warning systems. Until the more advanced US fighters, like the F6F and the Corsair, appeared in numbers, the F4F Wildcat formed the main force for the US Navy and the Marine Corps. When the Wildcat production ceased at Grumman in 1943, the GM FM1 and FM2 versions stayed in production and kept in service on smaller escort carriers. The Wildcat's lower landing speed made it more suitable for operating on short deck of small carriers than the later Hellcats. Their most famous battle in this role was the Battle of Samar in October 1944, when escort carriers and destroyers had to defend troop transports against a powerful Japanese fleet. The small destroyers bravely charged the Japanese fleet, while the Avengers and FM-2 Wildcats from the carriers strafed the enemy ships. And they managed to cause so much confusion, the Japanese forces thought they are facing a much larger US fleet, and they withdrew. The Wildcats were also used on escort carriers on the Atlantic until the end of the war, and they participated in Operation Torch in North Africa. The F4F was used by the British Fleet Air Arm as Martlet from September 1940, used both as land or carrier-based fighters. The British received nearly 1,200 Wildcats during the war. The last air raid of the war in Europe was actually carried out by the British Fleet Air Arm in May 1945, with the participation of 8 Wildcats against a submarine depot in Norway. Though the F4F originally started as a biplane design before World War II, in the end it became a capable fighter, which was used through the war up until the end. Though it was surpassed by more advanced designs over the years, it managed to hold its own against the more nimble Japanese fighters on the Pacific, and had a great part in the Allied victory. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.